Hello everyone, welcome to room 2 of Women in Science 2021. My name's Chris and I am the Access Officer at Trinity College, Oxford, and with me here are two fantastic women in STEM, and I'm just going to very briefly introduce Rhiannon before she starts her talk in a second. We've got, of course, Rhiannon, who's going to be talking about her journey through science, from chocolate to meteorites and everything in between. And of course, in a second, in about 15 minutes, we'll have Charlotte talking about how we can use light to turn switches on and off. So, Rhiannon, I'm just going to ask you to very briefly talk about yourself, perhaps talk a little bit about where you are in your career, just for sort of a minute or so, and then kick off your presentation whenever you're ready.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Chris. Well, hello everyone. It's really nice to see you all today. I'm just going to give my screen a share now, and I'm going to be telling you today about my journey through science. So this very much started when I was like you, back in school, and I quite enjoyed science and maths but wasn't really sure where I was going to go. So I applied to do engineering at Oxford, and I spent 4 years studying an undergraduate degree there. And from that I went on to do a PhD, which I've just finished, and I'm now starting working at the Natural History Museum in London. And during this time I've done lots of different projects in science and engineering, and today I'm going to tell you a bit about those and hopefully shake off some of the kind of classic views you'll have on science and engineering and make you realise that it's not just about roads and bridges. So here goes. Here we go. So my journey through science. First of all, I want to tell you a bit about what is science. Science, when you talk about that in schools, you look at observations, questions, you're making hypotheses, making predictions, running experiments and results. And these are all the kind of things that I've done throughout the last few years in my work. But my undergraduate degree was in engineering, and I'm actually trained as an engineer. So how does this kind of compare with the science side? So the kind of key way we define science is we want to be able to increase mankind's understanding of the universe. So how does this differ from engineering? Well, I'm going to tell you a bit about what is engineering. So as an engineer, as our robot friend down here has said, is we want to apply science to make things work. So we're making new things and we're using those scientific discoveries to be able to improve the world around us. And I like to think that now I kind of sit in both. So I've done a lot of science and a lot of investigation, but I've also done a lot of application and kind of understanding how we can use the things we learn in science to improve the technology and improve everyday life. And this comes on to the fact that science and engineering is everywhere. You see it in our wind turbines, in our iPhones, in sport, when we go on holiday, when we go traveling to work, and even in our toothpaste. It's literally everywhere, and anyone can work in science and engineering and be one of the next scientists and engineers. So I'm going to tell you a bit about who we actually are and some of the people that I've worked with over the time that I've been working in science and engineering. So first of all, this is my friend Sally. We went to school together, and she's currently working on the HS2 project, which, if you've heard of it, it's based in the UK, and it's a giant railroad going halfway across the UK to try and improve transport throughout the country. And it's a really exciting project, and she is a civil engineer. And as you can see from her photo, very much the classic kind of engineering perspective you'd expect. But I've also got my friend Comey. Now, she's a doctor and has been working on the development of the COVID-19 vaccine and the effects that COVID-19 has been having. And she doesn't look like a scientist in what you typically expect, because, you know, she's not dressed in a white lab coat, just a regular person, looks like she'll be going to an office job. But she's doing fundamental research into COVID-19, which, as we all know, has had a big impact in our lives. This is my friend Megan. She's also a scientist. We actually row together, so she doesn't always look like this. And again, she's kind of fulfilling the stereotypical idea of a scientist. She's got her mask on, she's got her lab coat on, and she's working on research to improve women's health. And then I've got my friend Marjana, and we've worked on quite a few projects together. And she did engineering as her first degree, and has now moved into more material science development and looks at everything and anything under a microscope. So on the picture here, she's actually looking at rats' tendons, but has done kind of a wide variety of things to trying to understand why you can't open a plastic bag when you first get it at a shop, not that many of us use those anymore. So this just kind of gives you a bit of perspective on literally anyone can be an engineer, and it's not down to how you dress or wearing hard hats, and anyone can be a scientist. It's not down to, all dressed up in a lab coat in white. So they're my friends, and just a few of the people that I know in science and engineering. And now there's me. So here's me over in the corner. And I've actually just started a really cool job at the Natural History Museum in London. Now, if you hadn't been before, I would 100% recommend it. It's so much fun. They have all sorts of amazing exhibitions. In the background here, you can see the skeleton of a giant whale. But you've also got all sorts of things. They've got an amazing exhibition on at the moment showing wildlife, and it's all free. So you can just wander in, and unless you're going to a very specialist exhibit, you can just wander around and kind of enjoy seeing some of the amazing wonders of the world. And I'm going to tell you a bit about how I got there. So I've said this is my journey. Well, I started working in medicine, in pharmaceutics, and that was doing a project in my undergrad. Then worked on chocolate. Then worked on jet engines and materials development and technique development for my PhD. And now I'm working in meteorites. So I want to tell you a bit about how all these are related and how I've managed to move from one to the other. And this is why I don't feel that I'm an engineer or a scientist, because I very much do both. And they're not things that I would have originally thought would count as science or engineering when I started this. Maybe the jet engines, but the others definitely not. So first of all, looking at medicine. So this was a project I started in my undergraduate degree. We actually wanted to understand a little bit more about pharmaceutics. So when you pop a blister packet of pills, the way that they actually come into the packet originally is they're fired in from a machine that compresses them. And the problem is, a very high percentage of them often break at the point that they're put into the blister packet, which then means that that package is unusable. And this is a massive waste of energy and materials and cost. So I was looking into why some of these various medicines break and why they don't, and how we can actually change the composition of them by not changing the active ingredient, but by changing how they're made so that we get significantly less breakage. And what I did is I was able to conduct an experiment under a microscope like this one, where I was able to put my powders that make up the medicine and also a tablet itself and have a look at what happens when you crush it or apply a force to it. And what I was able to see is when you look at the powders and then you look at the final material, they all look very different. And the ones that had these kind of big cracks in and things were actually very susceptible to just breaking. Whereas ones like this that are very compact and held very strongly together were significantly less likely to break on impact. And we were able to use this to have a look at which kind of coatings we use on tablets as a completely non-active ingredient to be able to improve the chance of them getting from where they're actually manufactured all the way to you without breaking. And so that was kind of my first delve into pharmaceutics. And I was doing an engineering degree at the time, and I had no idea that this was actually based in engineering, but because of the kind of force testing you're doing, you can be looking on a micro level and still working in engineering. So I really enjoyed doing that. So I then went on and carried on using microscopes to look at chocolate. So we had a similar kind of issue with chocolate, that when you stack loads of chocolates and transport it all across the world, you often end up with broken chocolate. Now, I know my nan says it tastes the same, but still, when you get a fresh bar of kind of high quality chocolate, you don't really want it to be smashed to pieces. So I was looking into whether there were different ways that you could store chocolate at different temperatures, so that when you then put it in the shop, it still tasted the same, but while you were transporting it, it wasn't going to break. And again, I did this by having a look under the microscope. So here's our nice chocolate at room temperature. And when I pop this under the microscope, this is what it looks like. It's kind of all messy. We call this something called a messy polymer. So it's just all pieces all kind of moving over the top of each other. So I went, okay, so I'm going to cool this down to different temperatures. And this chocolate, even down to 5 degrees, very much looked like this, -5 degrees. But what happens when you cool it down to -20 degrees is you get this horrible discoloration. And it looks like this. And these two pieces of chocolate are exactly the same. It's just that this one has been cooled down to -20 and it looks completely different. And what's happening is all of the kind of butter in the chocolate is actually crystallizing and changing how the chocolate looks under a microscope. And this also affects how it tastes. So even though the colder you store chocolate, the stronger it gets and the less likely it is to break when you transport it, we found that there was a limit, because at the point that it got to this kind of level, as soon as you heated it up again, it didn't go back to this kind of yummy, gooey looking chocolate. It stayed at this, it was kind of very crunchy and had a very off taste. And again, that's something that's able to be applied in that when you're storing chocolate and transporting it, if you store it at a slightly cooler temperature, kind of 5 degrees, it's less likely to melt and it's much less likely to break. But then when you take it back up to normal room temperature and store it in the shops, it's still going to taste just as good. So now I've moved on to my PhD and I've gone, cool. I like working in microscopes, which is kind of the key thread throughout what I've worked in engineering and science. And I was looking at jet engines. So now I'm moving on to kind of much bigger things, but looking at them from a nanoscale. And I was looking at developing new techniques and new ways that we could look at developing better materials for jet engines. And so to do this, I was able to take different materials and look at them under the microscope while they were hot. So we're talking like 900, 1,000 degrees. So 4 times the temperature of an oven, which is very, very warm. And what we had to do was find a way to be able to heat up these materials and still be able to look at them under a microscope. And we wanted to do this because when you heat up materials, particularly metals, they often change, which is what we can see here. And you get movement on a micro level of all the tiny parts of the metal, which we call grains, that are kind of like tiny jigsaw puzzles, which is what all these little pieces are. So all of these are grains. And we wanted to see what movement occurred at temperature that when you cool it down, you might not then notice. And the problem is, if this movement keeps on happening, eventually something will fail. And what we needed to know is at what temperatures and how designing the material, how long it would take for this failure to occur. And so we looked into this and we were actually able to develop a technique that could do this. So we can now design better materials and check them at these temperatures to see how they're behaving, which is great for being able to make significantly more efficient materials for things like jet engines, which again saves money, saves energy. So again, a kind of microscope theme, and this brings me on to what I'm doing now, where I'm looking at meteorites. So we've got the Earth over here, and some of you might have heard we had a meteorite fall recently. It's called the Winchcombe meteorite, and it's something that I'm going to be looking at. You might have seen it on the BBC. And it's a very special type of meteorite because it's very soft. It's not like one of those big iron ones that are likely to, they're made of metal that are likely to cause a problem on Earth. It's very soft, often mainly made of clay. So when it dropped, you'd expect it to kind of explode everywhere. But we were lucky in that we were able to find quite a big bit. This is a bit of the Winchcombe meteorite. And what we can do with that is, again, let's put it under the microscope. And we can look at what it's made up of and all of the different elements. And with a special kind of microscope, just like this one, we can see all of the different elements. All of these different colors are different elements. And what's cool about that is it gives us a better understanding of what kind of elements are actually around at the start of the Big Bang, as well as what sort of elements are around on other worlds, and whether there are things in science that we don't know. But ultimately, it gives us a better understanding of space. And this is me kind of moving much more into the science realm, where jet engines things were significantly more engineering based, whereas now kind of moved into science and geology. But again, it's really exciting. And I'm just getting to work in the Natural History Museum among all these artifacts. Today I was in, we were having a look at a piece of Mars, which is something I never thought I'd be doing back when I was doing pharmaceutics. So I guess what this presentation kind of tells you is there's no one way to be a scientist or engineer. And if you're kind of curious about the world and interested in kind of how things work, or what the world means, or you just, quite good at science and maths at school, definitely look into going into science and engineering, because it's so much fun and there's just so much you can do with it. So I guess my last question for you all for today is, what scientist or engineer could you be? Thank you very much for listening.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Rhiannon. That was really, really awesome presentation. Really, really lovely sort of examples. You gave us so much depth there as well, which is really, really interesting to see. I've got a couple of questions that have come in on Slido, but I think we'll come to those after Charlie's presentation as well, and we'll have all the Q&A at once. But thank you so much, Rhiannon. Charlie, I'm going to very briefly introduce you. Of course, we've just heard from Rhiannon. Charlie is doing a PhD in her first year, and she's going to tell us about how we can use light to turn switches on and off, which is what she's working on in her PhD. So, Charlie, please do tell us a little bit more about yourself, and then take us through your talk today.
Okay, I will just share my screen first. And there we go. So yeah, hi, I'm Charlie, and it's really nice to be able to talk to everyone today. I'm just going to talk through a bit about myself and how I got to where I am today, and then a little bit about my research. So my research looks at how we can use light, and in particular how we can use light in chemistry and in reactions. So there's a little picture here of me when I look like a very typical scientist wearing the boiler suit. This was on a summer placement that I did one year when I was working at a biodiesel company. And yeah, basically I thought this was quite a good idea because it shows that I was in a boiler suit. And again, going off what Rhiannon said, I was kind of ended up doing some more engineering, even though I am a chemist. So there's definitely lots of places you can go. So yeah, this is me when I'm looking a bit more glamorous. I am currently a PhD student at Trinity College. And yeah, as I mentioned, I research light and how it can lead to some exciting applications, such as imaging in cells, so we can see what's going on in the body, and even in making new medicines. I also, in my free time, like to do some of the social events with the college, and I kind of think it's a really good idea to have, your science and your research and whatever you want to do, but then also having time for everything else on the side. A little point of what I do on a daily basis, so you get a bit more of an idea of what happens when I'm actually at uni and in the lab, is this is a column chromatography kind of setup which I use to purify my molecules. So a lot of my molecules, they need to be purified. Sometimes we have different byproducts in there, and this is just something that I end up doing probably once a week, so that was quite a good thing to show you. And it's quite funny, sometimes you get really pretty colours and pretty gradients, and my friends and I post them on Instagram, which might be a bit sad, but I think it's really cool. And yeah, this is just how I got to Oxford. So I grew up in Rochdale, which is a small town in the northwest, and I went to my local comprehensive school, which was St Cuthbert's. I got all right GCSEs. I got good enough GCSEs to get into my local sixth form college, but because my school didn't offer A-levels. And yeah, this is a very cringy photo of me when I've actually got my A-level results. But I hope that you guys can celebrate like this one day and yeah, be just as cringy as me. And then I was very happy, as you can see in this picture, because I got my offer to go to the University of Edinburgh, where I did my undergraduate degree. I studied a 5-year master's degree in chemistry, and they do an extra year in Scotland, which is why it's 5 years. But I actually really enjoyed this degree setup because it meant that I got to do 2 research projects, one in my 4th year, which was a couple of months long, and then a really long year-long project in my final year, which really showed me that I either didn't or did want to do research, and I did want to do a DPhil. So then, yeah, I got offered a place for a PhD training program at the University of Oxford in inorganic chemistry, and that's kind of where I am today. I just started my research project, so yeah, it's going well. So this is kind of, I wanted to talk about this because I think that this is what really made me realize that I wanted to do research. Most of my summers between university, mostly I was bored, but also I needed a bit of money. So I had different placements in different companies. You can do it in companies. A lot of my friends also stayed at the university and worked in research groups there. If they wanted to get a bit of more knowledge about like research and how it worked. So between 2nd and 3rd year and 3rd and 4th year, I was a placement, I did a summer placement at Rosehill Polymers, which looks at plastics. And I was a research and development chemist, and I got a lot of freedom to do projects, and we were looking at how you formulate plastics so that they can have different properties. So one of the important properties, well, one of the important applications we were looking at is pipes that go right at the bottom of the sea, at the seabed, and they transport things like oil or fiber optics for communications. And we needed to make sure that we had plastics that could withstand these kind of conditions at the bottom of the sea. And it was really nice because when I went back in my 2nd year, some of the projects I'd worked on previously had started to actually be brought into the business as products, which was nice to see. And then I got my placement in my 4th and 5th, between my 4th and 5th year, at a company called Argent Energy, where I was developing new biodiesel formulas. And I really liked this one because it showed me a lot about sustainability in chemistry. And they make biodiesel, which they actually use in buses in Scotland, from things like chip fat from McDonald's and basically lots of gross things that you find in sewers. But it was a really interesting project. And just a note about like what I would say would take from this is that the research and development project that I had at the Rosehill Polymers, it wasn't advertised. I drove past their company and I saw it, and I found their website and emailed them and said that I was interested in plastics and chemistry. And that's how I got the placement there. And then with Argent Energy, I actually applied for this placement between my 3rd and 4th year, and I didn't get it, and then rang them back the next year just to ask if they'd got any more placements that they were advertising that I hadn't seen, and just because they'd remembered me from the year before, and they were quite excited that I'd got back in touch, they gave me this placement. So always, if you're interested, just go for it. Like, it's fine. If the worst they can say is no, and you try again. Another really interesting thing that I did in my undergrad was I looked at representation of women in STEM alongside my degree. And we basically looked at the curriculum for A-levels and the kind of the same qualification that you'd have in Ireland and Scotland. And we looked how females and males were represented in the textbooks. And this is kind of a summary of what we saw. So this is the name of boys and this is the name of girls. We also looked at pronouns and at pictures too. And basically we found that in places such as Ireland, there were some quite big issues and discrepancies between representation of women and men. And whereas in England in the A-levels, they seem to concentrate more on the science and don't tend to mention the famous scientists and stuff. And this was actually really refreshing to see in the English and the A-level curriculum, because it doesn't discourage women because they don't see women's names or women in pictures. However, in the Irish and the Scottish ones, it seemed that this could be a source of where my students were being discouraged because they weren't seeing role models. So I thought this was a really exciting piece of work, and also really cool to see, and hopefully still shows that it is really important to work on representation, especially within STEM. So this is a little bit about my research. And yeah, I am very interested in light, and just like heating or like grinding something up in a pestle and mortar, light is a way of giving a system energy. And then we can call this system can then have a change because of the energy that's been given. And then we can call this a stimulus. And then we need things to change, such as like our body, like our bodily responses, so moving, our eyes blinking, that kind of thing, but also to treat diseases. But we need to make sure if we're using light, we're using the right light. So we have to have light that will penetrate into the body, so it can actually reach where it's supposed to be, but we don't want it to damage tissue. So as an example of this is a picture I took, but you can use your torch, and you might want to try this at home, but you can use your torch on your phone and shine it through your phone, and then you should see like orange and red colors transmitting, and these are the wavelengths of light that we should be using in our body, because they have good transmittance and they are non-damaging because they are visible light. So more specifically about my research is we are looking at these molecules, and when you shine light on them, they can change their shape. So go from this Z shape to this more like C shape over here. And when you shine light on them, they can change how they bind to different things. So I'm looking at how they can bind to metals. So as you can see here, we've got one binding area, and then we've got two, depending on the shape. And this can actually influence different properties of the metal. So one property that it can influence is how that metal can emit light itself. So this is known as luminescence. And luminescence is really interesting because it's what a lot of systems use to image cells. So this is a picture at the bottom here of some cells that have been imaged using luminescence. And I'm kind of looking at how we can change the luminescence, and we can switch it on and on by using these molecules that combine to the metal. Lastly, I just thought if I could go back to my year 12 self, what would I say, and what advice would I give you? I think most importantly at this point, maybe open days and virtual open days. I think at the moment, you also would like to look at the university and college Twitter accounts, because they tend to give you a really good vibe of what's going on in the colleges and the university, and kind of how it would align with what vibes you kind of have for yourself. I think that one thing that I did when I was in year 12, actually in year 13, was I did an EPQ, which is an extended project qualification. And this was like a mini research project. And this was definitely the first bit of research that I ever got to do. And I got to choose what I was doing it on, and it was recognized by the universities. And I think it really helped my application. And it also meant that I realized early on that I actually did enjoy research. Also really important points, make time for yourself. Work isn't your life. Don't let it take over. It's very easy to do. And also, don't overwork. Don't work too hard, because sometimes it can actually not help you, and you can actually get too stressed, and sometimes taking a break might seem like you don't have time to. When you come back to things, you're much more together. And that is something that I've definitely learned over the past few years that has been a major turning point. So yeah, thank you for listening to my talk, and if you have any questions, I'd be very happy to answer them.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Charlie. That was really, really interesting, and some really useful tips you included at the end there. Hopefully everyone who's watching today found those useful. We certainly have a bit more of a chance to go into those in depth now. So after those two fantastic taster talks, we're now going to have a bit of a Q&A. So if everyone who's here actually wouldn't mind turning their cameras on, that'd be fantastic. And we've got loads of questions, as I'm sure all of our participants can see, coming through on Slido. And I'll just unpin, so we've got everyone in the meeting. We've got loads of fantastic questions coming through. So I'd love to just introduce two of our undergraduate students who we've got with us today, Clarissa and Sophia, who are both biochemists. But I'll leave it to you guys, if you wouldn't mind just sort of saying a few things about yourself, introducing yourself, what year you're in, things like that. Sophia, would you mind going first?
Yeah, hi, I'm Sophia. I'm a first year biochemist, and I went to a state school in the north of England in Liverpool.
Fantastic, thanks Sophia. Clarissa?
Hi, I'm Clarissa. I'm also a first year biochemist with Sophia, and I went to a grammar school in London, and I'm really relieved that final end of year exams are over now.
Fantastic, thanks Clarissa. Solid introductions there from both of you, and we've got plenty of questions here, so I'll try and sort of give everyone a question in turn. We've got a couple of specific ones first, actually, that came in from in relation to Rhiannon and Charlie's talks. So thank you for those, everyone who's watching. First up, Rhiannon, does the so actually I'll read the question in full. That is so cool. Does the Natural History Museum have a skeleton model of the Titanoboa?
I don't know, but I can find out for you. I only started working there 3 weeks ago, but I know it has lots of artifacts, and it very much depends on what's on display. So we probably have one. It'll just be whether it's on display. But if you want more information, I'm sure if you're in contact with Chris, I can get you some details.
Yeah, please do. I've sent out the email to everyone about this, so we can also probably put an announcement. Rhiannon, if you send me a link to where to look at, I can probably send an announcement out on Slido for everyone. So yeah, we'll get that out for you. A couple more specific ones. Charlie, how does column chromatography work? What exactly are you doing, and how is it done?
That's a very good question, and one that I actually really wanted to talk about, but was a bit scared that people wouldn't care about. So yeah, no, column chromatography works based on the solubility, so how molecules can dissolve in different media, such as one is acetone or like alcohols, and then it goes by weight. So we use the gravity, and the gravity pulls it down, and basically things with different weights move at different speeds, and therefore you can get them out at different levels. And you take what they're called fractions at the bottom. So as you you have a little tap and you change your fraction, and each fraction comes out, and then you test it and you see what compound is in that fraction, and you can separate it, and then you can go on to basically work it up. But yeah, that's how it works.
Fantastic, that's really interesting. Thank you. And yeah, definitely worth explaining. I think people are curious about pretty much everything that's been talked about today. So in fact, on that note, before we get to any sort of questions about admissions or anything, I just want to, Rhiannon, I have another question about something you talked about, which is do you know how they changed their chocolate coats to ensure that the chocolate didn't just go brittle at minus 20 degrees Celsius, or did they? Was this something they did?
So the problem is you'd have to change. So some chocolate doesn't go brittle at that temperatures. So chocolate is made up of two parts. You've got cocoa butter and the cocoa mass. And if you have quite high amounts of cocoa butter, that's the bit where you could see it was quite brittle and kind of moving. And it's why ice cream chocolate is actually quite different to normal chocolate, because they basically reduce the amount of cocoa butter and increase the amount of sugar in it. So that's basically how we go on to do that.
Gotcha. That makes sense. Thank you. Yeah, that's really interesting. Charlie, I have a follow up from someone very briefly. You just described column chromatography. Someone said, so could you compare column chromatography to oil distillation?
You could. We tend to use it for different things. So obviously, oil distillation, we basically separate things on a basis of their boiling point, and normally the length of the chain that you use. Column chromatography can be used for a lot different molecules. So one with more complicated functional groups and more complicated structures. which is why we use that instead. But you can use distillation, and I haven't used distillation yet in my project, but my friend is doing polymer chemistry, and he used distillation to distill and separate a lot of his different polymer lengths. So yeah, you can definitely compare it. It just depends on the molecule that you're working with and the structures that you are working with. But it's a really good question.
Yeah, thanks very much. Thanks, Charlie. And thanks for whoever asked that question. Really, really sort of engaging with what our speakers have been talking about today. It's really, really, really nice when that happens. So thanks, guys. We've got a couple more technical questions, but I think just to come back to a couple more interesting speculative ones. Rhiannon, do you think meteorites, or in fact, I mean everyone I suppose, but Rhiannon primarily, I think, do you think meteorites could introduce new elements to Earth? How could we make new elements using technology aside from the laser mechanism? That's two questions. They've got value out of that question.
That's a really cool question. It's one of the things we're hoping to find out. One of the things we can see when we look at meteorites is not necessarily new elements, but new minerals, so different elements that are bonded together. And what's cool about it is that because these meteorites are exposed to really high temperatures and pressures, we often don't see these kind of combined elements together. We have yet to find any more elements, but we're developing new techniques all the time, so I'm sure we'll be keeping you updated.
Thanks, Rhiannon. Yeah, that's. I think it's a sort of an interesting topic, isn't it? Doesn't necessarily not we're going to find new stuff on there exactly, but yeah, new elements. Sorry, exactly, but new minerals. I'm just checking through the questions now. A couple more practical ones, and just for anyone who's not sure, by the way, we're answering questions on slido.com, slido.com, and if you pop in the code WIS, we're in room 2. It's worth noting. There's an option on the page to switch which room you're in. So if people are asking questions in room 1, I will check over that in a second, but we're just in room 2 at the minute. So perhaps 2 for Charlie. We'll start with this more practical one. To what extent has the photoelectric effect impacted your work on light? How much do you have to think about that?
That's a really good question. That was one of my favourite things that I did in my A-level physics. And it was my favourite experiment that we learnt about. And then when I went to Edinburgh, I actually started out on I did a chemical physics course. I then switched to chemistry later on, but I did a lot about the photoelectric effect and did a couple of experiments in the physics labs on it. So I definitely done it. I haven't used it recently as much, just because we haven't really been looking at currents. We've more been looking at how molecules change their shape. However, it's a very cool thing to bring up, and it was something that I actually forgot about until you mentioned that. I realised was actually one of my favourite experiments I did at A-level, which kind of explains why I like light. So yeah, good question.
Awesome, thank you, Charlie. We've got a couple more for Rhiannon and Charlie, but I think I'm going to direct some more general ones so that Sophia and Clarissa can add something in here, because there's plenty of those as well. So a fairly straightforward one, maybe I'll ask this to everyone, and we can hear from everyone, but I think particularly for our student ambassadors who are a bit closer to making this decision, how did you decide what course to study, and what things did you think about, and what point did you make that decision? Sophia first?
Yeah, so I've always had quite a biological interest in general. Like during primary, secondary school, I was dabbling with the idea of vet medicine or biology, and I knew I wanted to do something biological because I'd always heard that you're definitely happiest when you're doing something that you like and you're helping people. So that was always kind of the priority in my head. And then as I learned more about biology and chemistry and biochemistry in my A-levels, I realized that biochemistry was the perfect application because I'm not that much of a people person, so medicine definitely wouldn't have been the right choice for me. And I'm still very much applying myself to help people because I want to go into like pharmaceutical research or medical research. And yeah, I think I want to be very fulfilled that way.
Thank you. Yeah, really interesting sort of nuances of how you made that decision. What about yourself, Clarissa?
So I knew that I wanted to do something in the field of the biosciences as well. And I'd known that for quite a long time, but I knew medicine wouldn't be a good fit because, well, quite like Sophia, I just didn't really like the clinical setting very much. And I was considering applying for natural sciences, but when I saw the course at Oxford, it's a lot more specialized and you get to like deal with the like nitty gritties of like protein structure and stuff quite early on, which I really liked and I enjoyed this year as well. So that's how I chose this one.
Fantastic. Thanks, Clarissa. It's really interesting to hear sort of two different perspectives on how you guys chose the same course. It's really interesting. Perhaps Rhiannon and Charlie, you could give us a brief rundown of how you sort of, you've both sort of taken interesting trajectories, but perhaps at the undergraduate level, how you made that decision. Rhiannon?
Yeah, so I remember when I was doing my A-levels, I really enjoyed geography at school, and I really enjoyed maths. So I took maths and further maths just because I liked them. And I mainly took physics because I had another option and thought that it would be useful, but didn't necessarily really enjoy it. And then I just kind of went through the different options that you could do using those sort of subjects, and engineering came up as kind of quite a common one. And that was kind of my first introduction to learning about engineering. So I guess what you can kind of take from this, and I've spent the best part of the last 10 years in engineering and science, having not been someone at school that was always, I love science and that kind of thing. So I guess what you can take from it is you don't have to know what you want to do, but try and pick something that you think would be fun, and that you think you can enjoy, because you'll be studying it for 3 or 4 years. So it's worth taking the time to look through the uni perspectives.
That does make sense. It's it's a fairly long-term decision, but it's certainly not permanent. That's the other thing. You're not locking yourself into a route by studying one particular science. Charlie, could you tell us about yourself, about your undergraduate degree?
Yeah, I picked, I think I did like maths, chemistry, and physics. And I just really liked it. I'm not gonna lie, I've always liked science. I used to do like chemistry experiments with my granddad because he's a chemistry teacher. So I feel like I had a bit of a push in that direction. But when I got to Edinburgh, I initially chose to do chemical physics because actually I didn't think I liked the biological side of chemistry, which is now turned full circle because I'm actually doing like a lot of biological applications and I really, really enjoy it. So yeah, I would say like I started with chemical physics and I didn't really like the maths, was really hard to be honest. So I switched to just straight chemistry. And then my course allowed me to do a lot of different things and different options. So then, I ended up doing a DPhil, I think, and chemistry, like part of chemistry that when I first started out undergrad, I didn't think I liked. So yeah, there's definitely time to turn around, and you will get exposed to lots of different types of areas within your subject over your undergrad.
Thank you, Charlie. Yeah, that does feel like an important point to highlight. Okay, so we've heard a little bit from everyone about how they picked their course. I'm just going to have a look at these questions. We've got some interesting questions on the quantum realm, which are really interesting. Really, maybe just for Charlie, just following on from your Charlie, you've just talked about how you picked that chemistry degree. How you picked your degree and kind of how you find out all the different areas in it. Could you talk a little bit more about what it was like to study chemistry, and perhaps everyone can talk a little bit about what it's like to study their subject?
I really loved studying chemistry. I think I really liked the practical side of chemistry. So I was really lucky that in my course I got a lot of lab hours, even from first year and then all the way up to final year. I think a lot can be said for lectures and how you learn from lectures, but I think actually really doing the experiments, getting used to the equipment and talking to researchers and people who are like so high up in their field of research, which is what you inevitably do in labs. It really helped me, and I really enjoyed that aspect of my undergraduate degree, and I'm hoping to take that forward now. Yeah, and then also it's quite nice because it was hard work a lot of the time, but I did manage to get some I get some spare time at the weekends to hang out with my friends, so it wasn't too intense. So it was doable.
That's good to hear. It's that work-life balance which everyone does find. Thanks, Charlie. A similar sort of question along similar lines for Rhiannon. Why engineering science, and how does it feel to be an engineer?
It's a very good question. So I liked the fact that engineering science, particularly as I did engineering science at Oxford, and there's quite a few general engineering degrees around the country. I think Warwick does one as well in Durham. And basically I got to study all different types of engineering. So I did electrical, I did kind of core maths based, I did civil, I did mechanical. So you get to do the full range, which for me was really interesting because I didn't know which particular one I wanted to go into. Like I hadn't studied it at school, the closest I got was maths and physics. So that's kind of why I chose engineering science, because I really liked designing things. So I did technology GCSE and designed a board game, and I was good at maths. So that's why I went for engineering science, because it was a bit creative, but also like science, maths kind of based. Being an engineer is fun because I get to kind of design and experiment and investigate all sorts of different things, as you've seen from my projects and my presentation. And basically anything you can kind of go, why does this do this? And how can we make it better is pretty much what I can cover. And I've specialized a bit more now into kind of microscope side and looking at micro and nanomaterials kind of area. But you can see I moved around a lot before doing that. So I guess that's what it's like to be an engineer.
Definitely, yeah. And it sounds fun, I'd say, being an engineer, just tackling interesting problems. Clarissa, could you tell us a little bit about what it's like to do biochemistry and I guess to be a biochemist?
Yeah, I found it really fun. So the way they teach biochemistry, at Oxford and at Trinity College, is through both lectures, classes, and tutorials. So we get assigned sort of essays to do and then we discuss them in tutorials. So you get a much deeper knowledge of your subject, because you get the chance to talk to these like renowned experts in their fields, and you can have like a proper conversation and really explore like the smallest like details about DNA structure, for instance. That was one of our first tutorials. And then classes help you refine your skills with statistics and physics, which do come into biosciences. I did not know this when I applied, but I found it quite doable in the end. Yeah, and being a biochemist has been really good, and it's opened up, I think, a lot of opportunities like for this summer alone, and I'm looking forward to seeing what I can do in the future with biochemistry.
Fantastic. And if you don't mind me following up, what opportunities are there that you're getting involved in this summer?
So I'm quite interested in writing, and actually back in GCSEs, I thought I'd go into journalism. So what I'm trying to combine is science communication. So I'm looking forward to taking on like hopefully the director role of the Oxford Scientist next term. So that's Michaelmas term of 2021, yeah. And also I'm trying to get involved in bioinformatics because I've learned coding over the last summer, and I'm hoping to apply that to biochemistry as well.
Fantastic. I think that is a really interesting kind of journey that you're taking there, which is showing that biochemistry isn't just leading very much down to, being a scientist. You've got all these other strings to your bow as well, which is really fantastic. Sophia, maybe could you tell us about, I know obviously you're in first year, so you don't necessarily know where you want to go afterwards. do you have any thoughts on that? And if, wherever you are with that, could you tell us a little bit about the experience of, I think I'm going to move sort of forwards now, and maybe we could talk a little bit about the experience of changing between studying at sixth form and studying at university as well. How have you found that? Oh, you're on mute, Sophia.
So at interviews, I remember having a very nice conversation with my interviewer about how important biochemistry is, or at least for us, because it really does tackle every disease, every sort of biological abnormality, and that's what I really want to kind of devote my life to. And I'd love to just stay in research and answer big questions like that. I'm not sure in what medical field yet, but I quite like neurology and just neuroscience, so that might be an option. But it really does open up so many things. And as far as the jump between A-level and uni, I'd say that everyone will tell you the biggest change is the independence level and the amount of time management that you have to tackle. And if you treat sixth form and your A-level studies in a level-headed way and you start managing your time then, it shouldn't be too hard. But if you kind of are a bit more free-spirited and you don't timetable, you might want to practice, because you will definitely need it in uni if you want a calm experience, because it definitely kind of gets back to you if you haven't scheduled your time correctly, and then it's a very stressful, like 2 days before your deadline. So just kind of practice that skill.
Thanks, Sophia. That is a really important point to take away, I think. I think we've covered quite a lot of the general questions that I can apply to everyone. Maybe one here is, this is probably quite an important one actually, given today, what we're covering. What advice would you give to other women considering STEM subjects? Sophia, can I come to you first on that, and I'll just give everyone a second.
Yeah, so I actually, even talking to people here, it's sometimes a bit daunting because you are talking to very, very smart people, and sometimes, like in your textbooks, for example, I have a textbook, actually, I have it right here, and it's written by 8 men, and the picture is all 8 men. Is it this one? Yes. And it's just frustrating, really, because it's a really good textbook, and I have to study it, and it's just annoying. It's just very annoying that there is no women 50, 30, 20 years ago in my field, but there is now, and it's very nice. Like Elspeth Garman is a very big biochemistry powerhouse right now in Oxford, and it's a good time, I think, for science communication, for education. It's becoming more of a level playing field, and it's especially now in biochemistry, it's very important that it's about the science as opposed to the individual, because we are tackling very big problems with COVID and genetics and all of it. And if you have passion, and if you are very smart and devote yourself to something, then you will be acknowledged, and you will get in to Oxford if you can apply.
Yeah, I think that basically, in order for women to feel comfortable and to feel happy, especially carrying on in academia, is that we need to create an environment where women feel comfortable. And to do this, I think we need to champion each other. Like, if you've got a friend that's doing some amazing research, just be like, yo, my friend is like really cool, like look what she's doing. And if there's things like awards you've got, like, and this kind of things, even like undergraduate level, you should just like nominate your friends for, because this is a really good way of them getting recognized. And normally girls are a bit more, I'd say we're a bit more modest. We don't want to show off. It's actually proven scientifically that this is a thing. And boys are much more confident. They will go for things that they might not think they'll get, but they'll have a go at them. Whereas we brain, you tend to sit back and be like, no, I don't think I'm going to get that, therefore I won't apply. Whereas I think you just need to be like, I could have a chance of doing this. And you just need to apply for things. You just need to keep going, whether that's summer internships, uni, anything. So just really like have confidence in yourself. Like, if you, as Sophia said, if you've got passion, it'll come through in bucket loads. And I didn't get incredible GCSE and A-level results, and I am still here now. So I think it kind of shows that as long as you've got the passion and you really care, like, you can go a long way. And yeah, support your friends and support the girls.
Yeah, so there's this amazing society called STEMETS, which actually encourages young women to get involved in science. And they offer mentorship programs and internships and stuff like that. So I'd highly recommend looking into STEMETS as well. I'm a member of the society, and it's really helped me, especially through this undergraduate year.
Could you spell that for me, just so I can make an announcement on Slido so everyone can access that? STEM.
Yes, of course. It's spelled STEM.
Yeah.
ETTES. Sorry.
Fantastic. ETTS. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I'll just pop that out so everyone can get that down on Slido. Thank you all so much for your time today. It is coming up to past. I have got one or two more sort of interesting technical questions that, if anyone has any time, I'd be happy to sort of run over by 5 minutes. But also, if anyone does have to head off now, I totally understand. Feel free to. And certainly, someone's already sent in a thanks on Slido saying they have to head off. But this talk has really inspired them to do some light research on all the topics we talked about today. So I think that goes, from me, but also from that person, and hopefully all of our viewers today. Thank you so much, Charlie, Rhiannon, Sophia, Teresa, and everyone else who's been involved in making Women in Science happen this year. Thank you so much. I'm happy if any one of our speakers or ambassadors needs to head off now, feel free to. Otherwise, I'm happy to take questions for sort of another 5 minutes or so. We've got some really interesting ones about quantum computing and quantum things. So I don't know whether anyone wants to chip in on these. And perhaps we'll have a chance. So, for anyone who's interested in it, do you think quantum mechanics has promising applications in material science? Recent seminar on driven quantum materials has got me thinking about the same. Perhaps Rhiannon, do you have any thoughts on that? But anyone?
Yes, there's actually quite a big research group looking at this at the moment. So it's kind of moving beyond. So obviously nanotechnology was a real buzzword. I remember it was a big buzzword when I was applying. And this is kind of the next stage now. And it's looking at some of the research that's been done in dark matter into the quantum realm and whether that could be applied. So yeah, it's definitely one to look out for. And I'm glad whoever said it has kind of picked up on these sort of talks that are going on, because you're well ahead of the game.
Absolutely. Thanks, Rhiannon. Another quantum question. Does anyone think quantum computing can be used to do advanced fluid modelling to create better designs for air vehicles? That's something that someone's been thinking about. Don't know whether anyone's been involved in quantum computing at all.
I can pick that one up as well. So I guess fluid modelling, they're referring to things like CFD. And often one of the limiting factors is the amount of computer power you have. Because if you're trying to, model a body of air, you basically split it up into loads of really tiny little pieces. And the smaller the pieces you can make, the better understanding we have of the movement. So yeah, it certainly has applications for that, but it's often linked to how much funding you can get to be able to do that. But that's really cool that you're kind of looking at that again.
Fantastic. Thank you to everyone who's asking these really interesting questions. It is great to have you thinking about it this much at the point where most of you, I assume, are probably in year 12 as well, so this is really fantastic. One final quantum question. Rhiannon, this might again be for you. Do you think quantum dots have merit to be used in solar cells, and do you think they're likely to be used in the future with further development there?
I can actually answer this one if you want. My CDT, which is the program for doctoral training, is all about inorganic chemistry. And one of the groups that we had a lot of talks from were using quantum dots in solar cells. So it definitely is something that is already being researched and something that is at the height of the forefront of solar cell technology. So you are thinking on very good lines in terms of research, and this is obviously an idea that has got a lot of funding for. They are being used, and they're even being taught to other PhD students that I'm doing something completely different to that, and it's really cool. So good point.
Thank you, Charlie. Yeah, awesome. Finishing up these questions then, so one for Rhiannon, what is the most interesting material that you've worked with?
Ooh, I think it depends. I think some of the meteorite and Mars stuff that I've been doing recently is pretty cool, just because it is literally not from this planet. But I've also done some kind of cool man-made stuff. I'd say rat's tendons is also quite interesting. I've worked with that, and kind of seeing how bio things are kind of the microscope has also been fun. So I reckon they're probably the two that are most interesting.
Thanks, Rhiannon. I suppose this isn't the best. The best way to answer this one isn't necessarily to ask Charlie this question, but someone said, "Hi Charlie, your research looks pretty cool. Would there be in any way in which we can get in touch so that you can enlighten me with your awesome findings?" Of course, if you're happy doing so, we can potentially provide an email so you could potentially talk to this student. As sort of we'd have to think about safeguarding things, but either way, if anyone does have any questions, further questions going beyond what we've discussed today for anyone at this event, or even if you want to find out about what's happened in some of the other rooms after you've watched their live streams, which will be on YouTube later, then do shoot me an email, and I'll be able to sort out some kind of contact there. Perhaps something you could send over. Charlie, I don't know whether you wanted to say anything on that specifically.
Yeah, feel free to email me. I think Chris has got my email, so anytime.
Awesome, thanks. Okay, and so the person who asked the quantum questions said, "Thank you for answering all my quantum questions. I really enjoy being part of these academic discussions." That's really great to hear. Really glad you're enjoying this. I feel like this is probably the question I want to close with today. And I know I've asked Charlie and Sophia, but Rhiannon and Clarissa, what advice would you give to women considering STEM subjects, just as we close off for today? Clarissa, do you want to go first?
I think my number one advice would be there's no harm and there's no shame in just asking people for opportunities. So you will likely live near a university that might have a research department. Find the emails of the people who are researching and just shoot them an email saying, "I'd love to shadow you, I'm interested in your work," or just can we have a chat about going into research? And believe me, whenever any secondary school student asks me for advice, I am over the moon, and I know a lot of other researchers feel the same way. Even if they are quite busy, it's nice to know you're having an impact on the future generation. So I'd really say reach out to other academics. They'd love to hear from you.
Thanks, Clarissa. Does anyone have anything, just briefly before I ask Rhiannon for our closing piece of advice, does anyone else have anything? We've just got a question about getting involved with academic projects or getting involved in that way. Does anyone else have any advice on how to get involved with that? Considering that most of our viewers are going to be around year 12. If not, that's alright. I think Clarissa covered that fairly well, to be honest, which is basically just reach out. People are really, really pleased, especially young women who are interested in STEM. That's a target group that everyone wants to encourage. So if you see a project that you're interested in, find out someone who's involved, shoot them an email, and you'll probably be able to set something up. So in that case, Rhiannon, for our last question of the day, what advice would you give to other women considering STEM subjects?
So, someone once told me that most men will look at a job description or a course or anything and go, okay, so I can complete about 20% of this, I'm going to apply for this. And I've seen that to be true throughout the whole of my schooling and university and everything. Whereas I know I definitely used to look at any kind of job description or course, and if I couldn't do kind of 110% of it, I wouldn't bother applying. And I now don't. If I think I can do maybe not 20%, but 50% of something I want to do, I will go for it. And I would say exactly the same thing. Use Clarissa and Sophia and Charlie's advice. Get in touch with people. Even start with your teachers. And if you're even a bit interested in that, don't worry about whether you think you can do it. But, if you're interested, just go for it, because someone else in your shoes definitely would. So you got this.
Thank you, Rhiannon. I think I'll let you have the last word there, really. That's pretty much the best advice we could give. Thank you, everyone, for watching, and thank you to everyone who's spoken today for your time and for your energy. I think your presentations have really been appreciated. To everyone who's tuned in today, there is an evaluation survey that will be going out pretty shortly, so do fill that out if you could. It'd be really useful to find out, especially given that we're virtual again this year, anything that you think went really well or anything that could be improved. That'd be really, really great if you could do that. Otherwise, thanks for your time and thanks for watching. Maybe I'll see you again for another event like this next year. Thanks, everyone.